All right, y'all, it's 10:30 and I would like to call our subcommittee meeting to order. And I would like to read a brief statement. On Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is December 9th, 2021 at 10:31 a.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. Those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. And that is as fast as I can read that statement. Thank you very much. And let's see, with that, I will do a roll call. Mike Edmonds.
Present.
Lori Mazurbo.
Present.
Jay Young, present. That's it, right? It's just us three. All right, with that, we have a quorum. Diving right into the agenda, just wanted to give the subcommittee a brief update on a potential project that the U of A may be undertaking. Who was on the call? It was Allison and I met with Jason Jurjevich, who is a professor at the U of A in the geography department. I think it's got a longer name now, but the geography department. And basically, I think he reached out to the city because he is wanting to do research regarding racist housing covenants for neighborhoods in the city of Tucson. Just a little bit of background. He and his husband, I believe, moved to Tucson and bought a house in, I think, the Miramonte neighborhood. And in going through that process, came across the covenants that are still on the deed, or the covenant that's still on the deed that basically excludes essentially non-white Protestant folks from purchasing the home. Obviously, it's illegal, but the covenants are still on the deed. And the reason, obviously, it's important for us as a subcommittee is that is one of the main ways that Tucson in particular was segregated before those types of covenants were deemed to be illegal. So, he's wanting to dive into that and I think get a better handle of what areas and what neighborhoods in Tucson had those covenants and still have them, though again, they're not legally enforceable, and maybe map them throughout the city just to provide some more context to how Tucson became segregated, what neighborhoods had that kind of language. And then, I think part of the conversation, though we didn't get into great depth, is also what can be done essentially to get that, to deal with it, to get it off the deed, or to, do something, because the language obviously is still offensive, even though it's not enforceable. And so we didn't get into great depth in that conversation, but I personally have some thoughts about, totally erasing that kind of language from deeds, because then you lose the historical context. And I think that the history is important to remember. So anyway, there's a conversation to be had around that. But anyway, that was the basic conversation. I mentioned that, obviously we have our subcommittee here, and that we would be more than interested in collaborating with him, working on him, connecting with him, whatever that looks like. So he's obviously still in the early stages, doesn't actually have a project on the table yet, but I think is, doing his due diligence and research. So I, told him that we were a resource and would be happy to talk further with him, have him come to a meeting, whatever that looks like. So that's my brief update on the meeting that was had. Allison, is there anything that I left out that you think is worth mentioning?
I don't think so. I think that pretty well covered it. That was kind of an initial conversation and seemed really relevant to this subcommittee's work. And we kind of expressed support in understanding how that whole project moves forward. So,
any questions from the subcommittee or guests? Joe, anybody?
I was curious if he is familiar with the efforts some other places have done that sounds like what he's interested in. I know you had sent out, Jay, an article that talked about the University of North Carolina doing that. And in my email, one of the last things is actually a mapping project from the University of Minnesota that sounds like it's doing that exact same thing. It's got people going through deeds and covenants all over Minneapolis. And documenting those, and there are people who are trying to remove them, and there are some people that are really more interested in the documentation of it. There's also it's like a 1 hour PBS like mini documentary thing that's about that mapping project and segregation in Minneapolis in general. That's probably, if he's familiar with those, I imagine. I wonder if getting in touch with those people would be a good place to start.
Yeah, Joe, I think that he, if I remember correctly, he seemed pretty tuned into the things that are already going on, particularly the one in Minnesota. I know has gotten a lot of publicity, and I think he was aware of that. So yeah, I felt like he was tuned into that. But obviously, you're more than welcome to contact him on your own as well. I'm sure he'd be happy to connect with folks in the community that are interested in this topic as well, because I think he's relatively new to Tucson. So, that's certainly a possibility. And I'd be happy to give you his name. Obviously, he's a professor at the U of A, and you can find him pretty easy. So,
and I did forward Joe's email to Jason just because I noticed the Minnesota one.
Cool, great. Any other thoughts or questions about that from other folks? If not, I will move on to agenda item number 3. All right. So the next thing on the agenda is the HAST implementation source of income. Obviously, I think the reason that we would like to talk about this is source of income protection is very much related to housing segregation. And again, without going into too much detail, folks that have housing vouchers, whether they be Section 8 vouchers or, I think veterans also get vouchers. SSI is another source of income that is, generally from the federal government. People that have sources of income like that often experience difficulty in finding places that will take housing vouchers. And so what it does is, due to the nature, generally speaking, in most communities of the makeup of folks that receive housing vouchers, it ends up segregating folks into areas of lower opportunity, higher minority concentration areas, and just essentially perpetuates segregated housing patterns that we see in our communities. And one of the ways that particularly fair housing advocates and other housing advocates think that we can address housing segregation is by making it illegal to deny somebody housing just because they have some sort of housing voucher. So it doesn't have anything to do with saying, if you're renting an apartment for $1,000 a month, that you have to take $700 if that's what the voucher is for. But it's if they otherwise meet the requirements that other folks would have to meet to rent a unit, you can't deny them simply because some or all of the source of income that they would be using for that unit is coming from a housing voucher or some other source like that. And it is bubbling up within the city. I know that my understanding is that Councilmember Kozaczek became interested in it, and I believe a study session has been had. And anyway, it's starting to gain some traction. And again, that's kind of the brief context. And I think, you know, what we're wanting to do here is to have a discussion about that, how the subcommittee, you know, can address this issue and maybe the larger Housing Commission. And with that, I would also like to get some input from Ann and Allison about the issue and kind of what you guys think in terms of the subcommittee's role with this issue.
So I asked Anne if she wouldn't mind kind of giving us a overview of what's going on and why we're talking about this now. But just wanted to highlight, so I did send a link there in the email to everyone with information on the city's existing human relations ordinance. So if you had a chance to kind of look over that, you will kind of know what we currently kind of outlaw in terms of discrimination, and what we would be considering amending in an upcoming conversation. So Anne?
Yeah, Jay, thanks for that intro. And a few things that I would highlight. One is they have not yet talked about it. Mayor and council have not yet talked about it as part of a study session. Councilmember Kozaczek has requested it be a study session. And it's something that in talking about the housing plan, Mayor Romero brought up is something she wants to see brought back sooner than later, and in terms of bringing an ordinance to do the code amendment sooner than later. My understanding, and I just found this out, is that it will be on the December 21st study session in terms of there being a preliminary conversation. And so I think in my mind, and I'm not going to pretend I'm any sort of expert when it comes to this item. So I'm trying to do my homework, and we're working with a few others. So I think that you all probably have more knowledge and expertise that can be helpful. I think the question will be how, if this code amendment does go through, what does the enforcement and implementation look like? You know, we can change the code amendment to say source of income is no longer a way to discriminate in prioritizing housing. And what does that really look like? And I think that's a much more difficult conversation. And so that's where I think any thoughts and advice, and as we move through this, one thing I will say, as I learn more and knowing that this is not going to be an easy, this is not low-hanging fruit in terms of the housing strategy, that there will be many people that would not be happy if this goes through. And so as I learn more, we did refine the language in the housing strategy, and I put it in the chat. We will be releasing an updated version of the draft housing plan early next week, and really thinking about refining what it is we're asking for and why. And so they're sort of backwards. That action item is now called Evaluate Changes to the City's Human Relations Ordinance, Tucson Code Chapter 17. It is a short-term goal identified in the HAST plan. And then the paragraph that helps provide a little more context is there. Again, it's draft. So if any of you see it and feel like there should be additional explanation, or feel free to suggest edits, comments on that. And so it's in the chat now, and then we'll release that early next week. But so, yeah, definitely feeling like any input you all have and thoughts you have in terms of what the implementation and enforcement piece will look like. Also, the other areas are whatever you can, there will be people that feel like this is not something the city should be doing. So any sort of justification support information could potentially also be helpful. So Not sure if that's, and Allison, feel free to jump in if I missed anything, but those are my current thoughts. I'm happy to answer questions and hear what you all think about it.
Thanks. And
My
go ahead,
first
Mike.
question. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I go ahead, Jay? Or
Oh
no?
yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Didn't
Oh,
mean to interrupt.
okay. The first thing that pops in my mind is, I guess we, meaning the city, we get the lawyer to jump in on this though, as far as the wording and stuff, right?
Oh, heck yes.
Okay. That was pretty much it. As long as the lawyer says these are the words we can use, then I think we're good.
And even what we have there, I did ask our attorney's office to weigh in on that wording, and that is part of the refinement, just making sure that there's some better clarity.
Okay. Yeah, as long as the lawyer's on our sides.
But so Mike, just to that point, and to highlight something that Ann said earlier, is that, you know, it's one thing to kind of amend the ordinance itself and have the correct language in there, and then it's another thing to figure out how we enforce that, right? Like the city's discrimination ordinance with regards to housing has very little actually documented complaints that kind of get investigated. So our office that does that it's not currently a large part of their workload. And I'm sure Jay can talk to that, can speak to that a little bit more in terms of, you know, there's state and federal laws that I think people usually go towards when it comes to enforcement and making complaints. And so if we had our own source of income protection ordinance, we would have to figure out how do we actually process complaints and kind of adjudicate them, because it's not a huge part of our current staff workload.
Joe?
I think my first thought is that we probably don't have to remake the wheel, because there are 85 cities or so that have source of income protection, in addition to, you know, in the 70s and 80s, a bunch of states did it. I shouldn't say a bunch, but a handful. And since then, it's been something that's come about more at city and county levels. But there have to be some pretty good templates on how to do it out there, just because a bunch of places have done it. Have we looked at what other cities have as far as particular? I'm sure like the language is going to get right, because I trust the people who are doing it, and you know, the attorney's office and ranking and all that stuff. But as far as the next steps as far as enforcement, how that's done in other places, have we examined that, and is there kind of an accepted template? Here's how most places do it.
So I'll say, Joe, you're, you know, absolutely. And I'm so grateful for this poverty and race research group that has now documented, and they just updated it last month, every single source of income protection ordinance that exists. And you'll see that there is, you know, I just glancing at it, about 15 states and a lot of cities. Where it, to my knowledge, the city, and Jay, maybe you have done this already. We have seen the ordinances. There's this information, I put information in the chat there. There are some model policies, there's some model materials. We have not yet had conversations on how the enforcement and kind of what's working well, what's not working well. And that's absolutely something we need to start doing.
Other thoughts or comments?
Joe, when you said reinvent the wheel, it just reminded me about something I was going to bring up. Wouldn't we have like wraparound regulations anyway from the county and the state in this regard, or no? No?
What do you mean?
You cannot discriminate based on income in regards to housing relating to the county or the state? They don't exist? Oh. Ooh.
So,
in Arizona, they don't exist.
So
Yeah,
in Arizona, Arizona has the Arizona Fair Housing Act, which is what's considered to be substantially equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act. So basically, Arizona's fair housing law mirrors, if it's not exactly the same as the federal act, it mirrors very closely the federal act, and that only has 7 protected classes. Source of income is not one. And without getting too deep in the weeds, I mean, this is what I do every day. The state, in my opinion, doesn't do a great job of enforcing its own fair housing law at the state level. So that's an issue. And then, you know, I can talk more about enforcement on the city level as well. It's mostly what this city office does is they do not deal with housing discrimination. I mean, they do, but most of their time is spent on the other things they deal with, which if you review the website that was shared, they deal more with employment and public accommodation. And we have actually, as the Southwest Fair Housing Council, engaged with the office to really help them address the fair housing issues that they do get. And they send stuff to us, and we basically do a lot of that. And it's just because we know that they were struggling with it, and that's, you know, the work we do. So we're not really getting paid to do that, but we do. And I think the other issue with this is that most people don't know that the city has additional protected classes. And people don't know that there's a way to file a complaint. It's not obvious. And so, but I do think it's critical, right? I mean, if you're going to have a law on the books, the enforcement, if you're not enforcing it and people don't know about it, kind of what's the point? So that's just my commentary from, you know, dealing with fair housing every day. But, you know, the city does obviously think that, you know, what are there, 12 protected classes? So 7 of them match the federal protected classes, and there are 5 more than that the city believes are important. So, you know, if source of income is added, I think the enforcement piece is going to be critical because it will be violated regularly. I know that other jurisdictions that have source of income protection, it's violated regularly. I just know this through interaction with other fair housing organizations that are in jurisdictions that have source of income protection. So that's going to be an issue. And I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Well, one question for you, Jay, is are there particular jurisdictions that you feel like the city should reach out to in terms of ones that you think are working well and enforcement is going well?
I actually don't know. I do know that New York City has source of income protection, and actually the state might have passed it now, in the Fair Housing Justice Center. They're one of the premier fair housing organizations nationally, and I know that they address source of income protection or source of income violations. But I think the other thing about the city ordinance locally in Tucson is that the penalties are minimal. I mean, if you wanted to violate this, you could really just chalk it up as a cost of doing business and pay the fines and not really bat an eye. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, and the reason I don't remember is because they're so insignificant, in my opinion. So that's an issue. Criminal backgrounds, I mean, this is another thing, you know, it's different from source of income, but, you know, addressing how housing providers are dealing with and excluding people with criminal backgrounds is maybe even a bigger issue. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
No, Jay, I'm glad you brought that up. I was about to mention that, as when this came up in terms of thinking about source of income protection, Councilmember Santa Cruz in particular is really advocating that it be a conversation of both source of income and banning the box for rental applications. And so our attorneys are evaluating if that's feasible, and they do see them as different and feel like there needs to be a separate evaluation if the city has the authority to do that. So I do believe the item on December 21st is going to discuss both.
And, you know, the switching gears just a little bit, talking about criminal backgrounds, HUD already has guidance that it has provided at the federal level, obviously, that basically says that housing providers should be looking at people's criminal histories or criminal backgrounds on a case-by-case basis. Not that, you know, again, I think there's this misconception that, you know, what's being asked is that housing providers just not consider criminal backgrounds at all in determining housing, but or who can qualify for housing. But I think most people would agree that, you know, there's a big difference in terms of, you know, considering someone who has, you know, just gotten released from prison, who's been in prison for 30 years for, you know, armed robbery where somebody was killed and they've been out 6 months, versus somebody who, you know, got busted for an ounce of weed 15 years ago and has, you know, since been not had any interactions with the law. So, you know, what happens often is that any kind of criminal history, even sometimes just an arrest without a conviction, are being used to exclude people from housing. And, you know, when you look at the makeup of our criminal justice system and who is affected, it disproportionately impacts communities of color, people of color. And so it has a disparate impact on those communities which are protected by the Fair Housing Act. So, I mean, there's a whole other way to go about this as well, is to actually, for the city to spend some money to, you know, look at this through what's already available in terms of at the federal level, in terms of looking at criminal history on a case-by-case basis, and then, you know, filing disparate impact claims at the federal level or in lawsuit. So that's a much more complicated way to go, but, you know, banning the box, I think, is a good start. But there are tools at the city's disposal should they choose to put more money behind it. The last thing I'll say too is these types of things that we're raising, and I've said this before, but I want to say it again and be clear, any of these things that we are asking the city council to do is going to have fierce resistance from housing providers, home builders, anybody who's not an advocate for tenants and for regular folks. Anybody on the other side is going to resist this and put a lot of money behind it. And I'm very concerned that while I am incredibly supportive of the city looking at this issue and taking action, I'm maybe more concerned that if the city does do something or doesn't do something, but is kind of running it up the flagpole and there's conversation happening, that what you'll see it the next time that the state legislature is in session, that they will preempt this and make source of income protection illegal throughout the state of Arizona. So I think there are a lot of moving parts here, but, you know, I think our support as the Commission for Equitable Housing and Development and the subcommittee that we're on is critical, because if there's no support, I mean, it's an easy thing for the I think the powers that be to knock this down. So anyway, that's my commentary on all of this. But, you know, if we are actually interested in equitable housing and development, these are the types of things that we know work and we know are important and that we know advance equity. So, you know, I think this is really the core of our work. And, you know, I'll also go back to just one last thing. You know, we had this long conversation in the city about accessory dwelling units, and there was tons of public input, and the public input was, my understanding, overwhelmingly supportive. But again, there were other forces that came into play that made it a little less palatable. It did pass, but it's now being revisited by the city council. And again, that's such a small lift. In my opinion, in terms of housing and equitable development, it's such a small lift and it's already being reconsidered. So again, I think we're seeing the resistance in the work that we're doing, even around these, what I consider to be, in the context of housing more broadly, to be really, really small things that the city can do. So, you know, however we can support these issues and support the city council, I think is just imperative, or, you know, our work is going to really be moot. And we're, yeah. So anyway, that's again, my commentary. I don't know if there are other thoughts about that or other thoughts about, you know, how we want to take this on and move this forward.
So I definitely agree. It's something that we need to take on, and it may be getting too far into the weeds, but as I'm hearing folks talk, my thought is it's one thing to have a law and another thing about how you work within that law, being an agency that every day helps people find housing and then helps manage those relationships between clients and landlords. Our staff is trained how to deal with those kinds of things, and we run up against so many challenges in helping folks navigate the system, and often are told that we need lawyer representation to help folks when things, when we point out that that's not legal, you can't do that as a landlord, those kinds of things. And so just when I hear things about laws, I think from the perspective of somebody who helps folks with housing, I'd want to be sure that we're not just advocating for something that sits on the book somewhere that's inaccessible to just your average renter, and inaccessible to folks who work in the space that want to help people keep housing, get housing. Because I find the system's incredibly difficult to work within. We hit a lot of walls, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of money as a nonprofit to where folks get evicted anyway, and we're having to rehouse people because we just can't win because the system is so impenetrable. So for whatever that's worth, it's, to me, it's not just a law on the books, but it's talking about accessibility and working through even if it's a local government system is super challenging. They're not made to be easy, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Jay, I was going to pose a couple of really ugly timelines, but I think you just made a comment that it's got me a little concerned. So the first ugly timeline was, do we open this up for public comment before, some type of public comment or input before we move forward? But having just that scenario where you said, the state could get in our way, I'm wondering, then should we just push forward, get it on the books, and have our first test case in court or something?
Good question.
I think the cheaper way would be public comment, but if it might be worth spending the money just to go ahead and do it and then fight it out.
I'll say that I am sure that Arizona multi-tenant is aware of source of income protections and the fact that municipalities may be thinking about those. Just because, I gave a little chart of kind of the timeline of some of those, and you can see more and more of them getting passed as the years go on. I am sure that that is something that is in their thoughts, and as they influence the Arizona state legislature, that is something that would eventually come up for preemption. I've talked to a couple local state legislators about it that would be interested in making, that are interested in source of income protection in a positive fashion, rather than as a preemptive thing at the state level. But Jay's right; it's a huge ask, and big money forces are going to be against it, and I do not doubt that they already are, at least conceptually, flexing that muscle against it.
Yeah, and I understand that this is one of the issues that the Multi-Housing Association is dead set against not having happen, and I can guarantee you they know that it's being talked about, because that's what they do. I mean, they protect their interests, and they're gonna fight it. So count on it. And I think the other interesting thing, again, this is my commentary, but as the fight happens, just listen to the arguments that are presented as reasons to not do it. And almost always they say, whatever the case may be, whatever thing that is a little more pro-tenant or pro-human, they basically say, well, if you do this, you're actually undermining what you want to do, which is make housing more accessible and affordable. This is going to increase rents because if you do this X, Y, and they just always are like, well, it's going to increase the rent, which is what you don't want to do. However, they don't actually ever, in my experience, limited as it is, really offer up any evidence that that's the case. So just as you guys hear the arguments, listen and see if they hold water, but you know, it doesn't seem to matter. So again, my personal commentary, but and Lori, I mean, I think to your point as well, yeah, I mean, these laws and rules without enforcement don't really amount to much, which you can see, frankly, with the city's additional protected classes. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they have very little impact on housing and fair housing in the city, because like I said, nobody knows about it, and the enforcement mechanism is opaque, and the penalties are, you know, even smaller. So yeah, I think it's almost worse in some ways to have things on the books that make it seem like you're protected, when in actuality, you know, like you said, even with folks who know the system and helping folks navigate the system, it's still really difficult to get results for people that need assistance, whatever that may be. So
I would ask, just as the conversations unfold, like, don't hesitate to provide input on any aspect. Lori, to your point too, I think that there wouldn't be such fierce opposition if you know, if it was something where taking a Section 8 voucher was the most seamless system ever. And so as we move forward, how do we ensure that we're not making it completely onerous and difficult to work within that system? And what are the ways in which we can help support landlords in doing that? And so to your point, Mike, I think that's where, in my mind, public outreach and input's going to be super vital. Is what are the steps we can take to help, whether you're a housing choice voucher holder and trying to navigate and find housing, or if you're a landlord and now this is part of your doing business. And so how do we streamline that and make that easy? So I think there's a lot there, and so not sure how the conversation is going to unfold, but any input you all have as experts in that space. Thank you, Joe, for your link. I'm keeping kind of a running tab of info, and so just, I hadn't seen that, so just added that. Super helpful.
So I am happy to continue talking about this issue if we feel like we want to do that now, but I would also just like to pose two questions. And one is, what do we need to do as a group, as a subcommittee? What do we want to do from here around this topic? Do we want to study it more on our own? Do we want to suggest something to the larger commission? Do we want to just, you know, keep informed as things unfold? What exactly, knowing what we know now, you know, with all the context and background that we have, what's our next move, if anything, or do we not do anything at this point? So kind of what's next for us? What do we need to do as a subcommittee here? Anyone? Thoughts?
Don't all speak at once.
I thought we were waiting for Ann. I thought Ann was going to weigh in on this one.
No, what do we want to do as the subcommittee, Mike and Lori? I think it's really kind of the three of us. If we want to do anything at this point, or we just want to keep it on our radar, I just want to kind of pose, is there a to-do for us as a subcommittee at this point? And if not, then there's not. That's fine too.
Well, let's see. I mean, the verbiage, this is somewhat draft verbiage from the lawyer that was posted in chat, right? So to speak, kind of, maybe.
And that verbiage is in the housing strategy, in the draft housing strategy. It's refined from any verbiage you've seen before. And so that's why I posted it, if you have feedback on that. But I think more importantly, as actual information as code amendment language gets drafted and as we think about enforcement, those are the areas that I think this group can really help weigh in on.
I don't know, Jay, maybe just pose it to the general commission.
What do we want to pose exactly?
We're taking this consideration that we want this added to chapter 17 or embedded in it, in addition to the other discrimination things we want to make sure people aren't discriminated against. Maybe get their input. Say what's scary. I believe you. I take you seriously. Like, once let's say the county or the state becomes aware of this, they trying to jump in the middle of the road. I just don't like that. Somebody, we start to do something good and somebody gets in my way, I'm ready to just run over them.
Yeah. I hear you.
So.
All right. So what I have from you, Mike, is that we want to take to the larger commission that as a subcommittee, we would like to suggest that source of income protections be added to the city ordinance, and also ask for input from the larger commission at this point.
Yeah, at the risk of making other entities aware of our concerns.
Yeah, I think they're already aware.
Okay.
Just guessing here.
I support that. I mean, I think we wouldn't be doing our job as a committee if we didn't bring it to the larger commission.
Great.
My only thought weighing in on that is that I think Ann mentioned that this will be on a city council, mayor and council study session on the 21st. Looking at our timeline, we can't get anything on an agenda for the CEHD December meeting. This would have to be on a meeting probably January 6th. So there's going to be the study session between now and then. We'd have to get this agendized for CEHD and on the January meeting. And then I think our meeting would be after that. So yeah, I don't know. I want to know what happens at that study session too.
Go ahead, Ann.
I will say, I think that, and the study session is just a initial. They won't be taking action on December 21st, to my knowledge. Actually, I shouldn't even promise that since I haven't seen the materials, but the way in which I think it's more of kind of an introduction and providing some direction on what that code amendment might look like. So I think that your January meeting, you will be able to provide more input on that. That said, that's part of why we have the subcommittee update on each and every commission agenda, that I think you're absolutely able to have a discussion on, kind of have a summary of what your discussion today was. And then there's actually going to be clerk's office. And so at the meeting today. And so if you have questions about process and what you are not allowed to do, ask away so that you have any doubt. If you have any doubts or concerns, that might be helpful.
Well, and if it's agendized, our subcommittee report out, I mean, people can talk about it then, and I mean, we can discuss it because that's part of what we brought up in our subcommittee, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So theoretically, at today's meeting, someone could bring up that we discussed with HCD about this and want to bring that could happen this afternoon.
I will bring it up. That will be a big part of what or Lori talks about in terms of, I think what we did today. So for sure. Any other thoughts or ideas about, what we want to do? So that's one thing, right? We can, suggest to the larger group that we would like for a source of income to be protected under the city's ordinance, and ask for input from the larger group. Is there anything else as a subcommittee that we want to do that maybe doesn't have to do with the larger group in terms of like research, or I'm just throwing things out. I'm not trying to say that we should do this. Anything else that we need to do as a group before we move on to the next agenda item? I mean, obviously we'll keep it on our radar. I think that goes without saying, but if there's anything else. Okay. With that, if it's okay with everybody, I would like to move on to agenda item number 4, and that is HAST implementation as well, but it is the affordable housing checklist. And let's see, I believe that was sent out in an email from Allison, and I don't know if people had a chance to look at that, but it is Appendix B in the HAST plan, which is page 72. And again, just to give a little bit of context, I think the idea here is to have a checklist that is used when the city is developing, citing, dealing with affordable housing, generally speaking. And the checklist, the idea is that a project would be scored on these various criteria, and the reason for the criteria is to make sure that affordable housing is not perpetuating housing segregation and is creating affordable housing in areas of opportunity where people have access to opportunity. And you can see on the checklist, it's things like access to public transit, access to employment, grocery stores, libraries, healthcare, good schools, and then looking at zoning, making sure that, or having a factor be that projects be along transit-oriented development and higher density residential zoning. That would make a score higher. Also looking at whether things are in a flood zone, the size of lots, and then again, areas of opportunity. And this is, I think, partly where, maybe more of our attention is focused as the segregation subcommittee. Deconcentration of subsidized housing, meaning public housing, low-income housing tax credits, deconcentration of communities of color, and deconcentration of low-income households. And again, from a fair housing perspective, that's the idea of the Fair Housing Act, is that we're taking action affirmatively to undo housing segregation that we have talked so much about in our community, and without actually taking affirmative steps. Often what has happened historically is that affordable housing has been located in areas of low opportunity and in areas that further segregate our communities. And the idea here is to not have that continue to happen, I believe. So that's my kind of summary and context of this issue. And I will turn it over to Allison and Ann to chime in here and maybe give us some more context and some things to pay attention to.
Yeah, I can start with a little bit of context on kind of what's in HAST and what we've been working on as HCD staff. And then I also have Laura Sharp here joining us, who's our GIS data guru. Right, I mentioned, I think at our last meeting, that she worked on our poverty and urban stress maps this last time. And so we're kind of using GIS mapping tools to work on this current version of the checklist. So let me share my screen. And this is just to help me kind of go through what I want to talk about. So right, just as background, as you guys know, the draft HAST went to Mayor and Council last month, and we're expecting to move forward with them adopting it on December 21st. So still a draft, but we're rapidly working on some of the short-term action items, which includes this checklist, and I'll talk about why that is in a second. But right in the HAST, we kind of called out opportunities for better prioritizing sites for affordable housing, and the use of those would be for a couple options. If you remember, we're talking about repositioning some of our public housing, and we, as the city, have certain funds that we can use to support affordable housing development. And so what is, we want to start being more clear about where we want to incentivize that affordable housing development. And so working on that, we want to, this is the kind of current action plan for that item. We want to develop that checklist. I'm sort of starting to call what we have right now a tool too, that incorporates different criteria for citing affordable housing. And we're especially interested in getting feedback from this committee right now, because we're hoping to incorporate those criteria into an affordable housing RFP to be released in early 2020, early 2022. It's still 2020, right? But then, really want feedback from this group and potentially the larger commission on how do we refine that moving forward as well. It can be a work in progress for sure. So just to kind of give a quick overview of what the tool looks like right now before I hand it over to Laura, I think I'll just go over this really quickly because I think Laura will cover it more in depth. But we sort of created 3 different buckets for prioritizing the site considerations. And that's proximity to community amenities, mobility, so proximity to access to transit, bike routes, and walkability. And then, as Jay was mentioning, deconcentrating some of the existing patterns of segregation, including proximity to subsidized housing and areas of high poverty and areas of racial and ethnic concentration. And the other kind of currently the way that this is structured is that other site considerations like zoning and flood zones and the project considerations would be kind of scored separately. So I think Laura might have a better image of this, so of what it actually looks like in practice, but just remind folks that this is a draft. So we wanted to be able to come to people with this is kind of the start, but please, we're looking for input on the methodology, the process that Laura kind of used, and she'll talk more about that. It's called analytic hierarchy process. It's like math meets psychology. So right now, Anne and I have kind of scored these different criteria to prioritize those criteria. And the tool, though, can be used to incorporate. Go ahead, Anne.
And for some reason, bike routes are most important.
Well, we like mobility. But the beauty of that tool is that it can be used to incorporate broader community feedback, like the Housing Segregation Subcommittee or potentially the public or other policymakers in the future. So what I'm hoping for in this conversation is input on that methodology, potentially talking about having this committee also contribute to the scoring of that criteria, and then, thinking and visioning for how do we want to refine it and improve it moving forward, what could including the public in refining it moving forward be a good option. And so with that, I'm gonna ask Laura to share the tool and a little bit more of her data and methodology. Laura, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Let me share my screen. All right, so Allison already went over some of the criteria that we looked into, but I'm going to go over them again. quickly just to talk more about the data sources that we use and give you little snapshots of each of the different types of data before we look at the overall results of the analysis. So these are the community factors, and here we're measuring proximity to these different community assets. So for the majority of the things, the libraries, supermarkets, rec centers, and healthcare facilities, these are physical locations that, have finite points on the ground. So libraries, we've got data from Pima County. Supermarkets is the City of Tucson's business licenses. So anything coded as a supermarket, grocery store, discount department store, which I think is like kind of like a Dollar Tree. Tucson Parks and Rec centers, healthcare facilities or hospitals, and then a HUD federally qualified health center, which has to have certain kinds of requirements to receive funding to, and they serve underserved communities. And you can see all of these things on the map. The little heart is health centers. These are hospitals. And then the things that you're not seeing, because I didn't want to clutter up the map, is job opportunities in quality schools. And the reason those are different is because these are aggregated values at the census tract level. And these are things that HUD provides through their data portal. So the jobs proximity index just gives they do some sort of process to determine where the majority of job opportunities are in an area. And then for quality schools, which is also at census tract, they look at the performance of 4th grade students on state exams to decide if that area is close to a quality school or if it's close to low quality schools, depending on the grades of those exams. And let's see. There we go. Sorry, my computer is slow. My internet is slow. So for mobility, we're looking to proximity to different types of transit options. And so the point locations that you see are the proposed rapid transit stops for they're not in place yet, but we're looking into them. The yellow are the streetcar. Bus stops are not shown because there are so many throughout the city that it covers the map. And then the lines that you're seeing are different types of bike and pedestrian paths. So shared use paths, bike boulevards, separated lanes, and things like that. And that is data that we get from the Pima Association of Governments, whereas the other data that we're taking are from City of Tucson or Pima County. And again, this is the closer you are to that object, the better you're going to do on the score. The next one is deconcentration, and the factors that we looked at are low-income households, people of color, public housing, and not at the top of mind, also gentrification. And so for this, we are using the ACS 5-year census data. And for low-income housing, we're looking at the definition we're using is from choice. So no more than 40% of the population is below poverty. That gets a good score. And if you have more than 40% of the population below poverty, you get a bad score. And similarly with people of color, we're using the choice definition, where you don't want to be in an area where the percent of minority is more than 20% higher than the county's average percent minority. And so for Pima County, that's 48.3. So we're looking for areas that have no more than 68.43% minority. And then for gentrification, we use, if you're in the central business district, you get a high score. And then the further away from the central business district, the lower your score gets. okay, so we came up with all of these categories, all of this data and how we wanted to rank it. And then we used the analytic hierarchy process, which Allison started to touch on. And this is a method for determining the weights that we want to apply to these different variables that we came up with. So all of these things are important, but they're not all equally important. So I went through and asked Allison and Anne to rank each variable against the other one. And the idea behind this is that it helps you quantify concepts that are otherwise kind of difficult to, put a number on. And it just kind of does it in very minute increments. So you just think about one thing at a time. And as you're going through it, the formula starts to calculate, okay, you keep saying this, and it's keeping track of your score. So we go through and say, okay, how important is streetcars compared to, rapid transit stops? And so you have to choose, well, streetcars are more important. But then you have to go further and say, well, how much more important? So they said 4 times more important. And streetcars are 7 times more important than bus stops. And so we did that for each of the mobility scores. And you can see here is the sort of matrix algebra happening on the back. And then once we scored all of those things, we compare the overall categories to one another. And the point of that is to take care of any inconsistencies, because humans often can be inconsistent and say in one place, streetcar is really important. And then in another place say, no, it's not important at all. So this kind of helps, make sure that you have some sort of internal consistency. And the great thing about this is that we can repeat this for multiple people. So we can have all of the experts weigh in, and we're not just, that gives people more confidence in the methodology because, it's not just one person's opinion. And so the result of this is this map, which is a draft. It's a work in progress, as Allison has said. And based on the scores, so what I'm showing here on the right-hand side is the scores that Anne and Allison came up with. So they said, libraries are a weight of 0.07, but supermarkets are 0.44. So obviously, the closer you are to a supermarket, that's going to, benefit you more than if you're close to a library. And then overall, we see, as Anne suggested, mobility in this one gets a really high ranking compared to community assets, and then followed by deconcentration in the middle. And so this is the way the city, based on Anne and Allison's view, this is the way it turned out. You see a real yellow is excellent places to put affordable housing downtown. Midtown, orange is good, so kind of emanating out from that yellow. And then it just kind of gets, slightly worse as you go east. And then clearly in the south, that is an area that we don't want to put affordable housing. And then the last thing I want to show is the tool that I think Allison is referring to. And this is called a dashboard, and it lets you, it's very slow because it's a lot of data, but it lets you filter based on these categories that we came up with. So you can look at just the good locations. You can say, I only want places that are currently zoned for residential. I don't want it to be in a flood zone. I only want to look at city-owned land. And then over here, it's showing us this is being filtered along with it, or it's supposed to. I'm not sure if it's working, but yes, let's see. That one says HCD. So this is the top property based on all these filters. And then we see this pop up and we can see how it's, why did it get the score that it got, and who owns it, how it's zoned, all of these different things. And you can also search for a property. So this is not showing up because it doesn't meet my criteria, but if it did, we'd be able to click on a pop-up and look at it. I think that that's everything. So I can open it back up to questions and discussion.
Thanks,
When is
Laura.
our first class, and when are we going to be having a pop quiz on this?
No pop quizzes, but definitely questions of like, what are we missing? I think every time we kind of have gone through this, like different things have stuck out. Like, I think we were, as you all probably know, we've sort of had trouble, like, how do we quantify gentrification? Like, what do we talk about it? And so, right, like, I don't know that I'm comfortable actually using like the central business district as a proxy. For instance, that just kind of came up to me. So I'm curious if people have feedback on the criteria that we're using and that methodology, and then would we be interested in having kind of individual interviews with the current you, each of you, and kind of ranking these so that it's not just Anne and I, for instance, ranking those things before this tool is used as a criteria in an RFP. So yeah, open for discussion and feedback, and thank you.
Now, Laura, this is really cool. I love it. It's just, well, and Allison, like you said, when I heard Central Business District, my ears perked up too, and I went, wait a minute, I wanted to think that through myself. But no, this is great. It's this information gives you an opportunity to sit down and kind of think and feel it through as well.
Thanks, Mike.
I want to agree with Mike. Thank you, Laura, and everyone who worked on this. It's a lot to look at. That's a lot of data, and it's. I feel like that was like the brief first class, and my head's swimming a little bit just because of how much is in there. That's terrific. As far as the Central Business District, my one thought on that is, are we taking that into consideration for gentrification just because the city has looked at that through like the Gary Pivo study and noticed that the blocks around the Central Business District are the ones that are seeing gentrification? And my other question is, looking at how mobility is weighted and the places that we look at as great places to put affordability, is the bus rapid transit having a big influence on that? It's kind of a specific question, but.
Well, so we see that bus rapid transit is 0.1. So that's the weight that it's getting. So it's not getting, it's not the lowest, but it's also not, a significant contributing factor in this case. But this is, again, is just, yeah, I don't know if you're asking specifically about this analysis or just how we should approach it in general. But in this one, it's a small, drop in the bucket, but that, if you took this, maybe you would say rapid transit is the most important. And the more people who vote that way, the more, that's going to go up and contribute to the model.
And also something that's interesting, talking about the gentrification, I don't know if this is exactly right, but, gentrification is 0.09 and the streetcar is 0.17. If you're thinking Central Business District for gentrification, then streetcars in that area, you're actually getting more of a credit, if you subtract those two, right? If you're close to the streetcar, it's better than the gentrification. So they kind of cancel each other out, you know what I mean? Or not even cancel each other out. It's like the streetcar is more beneficial for your score. Not that that's wrong or anything, just kind of pointing out the kind of correlation there, maybe.
Yeah, and that those things are kind of, yeah, they're kind of measuring the same thing because the streetcar is focused in the central business district.
But then, you know, if part of the streetcar that's like going through West University and the university, I mean, those areas are not, I would argue, are not gentrifying. I would argue those were already, you know, already gentrified or already, you know, kind of upper income areas anyway. But, you know, overall, I think that this is just excellent. I mean, this is what I feel like all jurisdictions should be doing to affirmatively further fair housing. I mean, where you put affordable housing is so critical. And I love the way that it's weighted, and I like that there's a potential discussion about that. And, you know, really what I would like to see is, I mean, obviously you got to put some weights in there to get the thing going to have a conversation about it, right? And so I just feel like there needs to be larger conversations. I'd love to see more research about, you know, for the goals that we're trying to achieve, what does research show are the most important things for, you know, siting of affordable housing and having that in high opportunity areas. And then I think, you know, one of the things that's always so difficult about this kind of work and planning in general is you really need to ask the people who would be using affordable housing, people that are in affordable housing, what are the most important things for the folks that this is going to affect the most, and have that be a significant part of how things are weighted. Because if nobody says the streetcar is important, then it shouldn't have a whole lot of weight. Or if, you know, people say, I don't care, if nobody says I want to be near a library, but being close to jobs is way more important, then I think that the weight of folks who are, you know, going to either do live this or are going to live this is just critically important. Because I feel like if we're not living in poverty and this isn't our day-to-day, whoever that may be, you know, saying what's important is a little bit presumptuous.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's one of the things that I like about this method is that we can, you know, we can have as many people as we want, you know, give their opinion. And it would probably be really interesting to compare what the answers of the people living this reality compared to the planners, what they think is important.
Right. The other thing I saw that is a detail, but I don't think it's a minor detail, and that is the way that poverty weighs into this. I think what I saw is that poverty was 48%. Yeah, there it is. Percent minority. If you have a 48%, 28% greater than 48% is not 68%. That's, you're adding percentages. It's I don't think that math is right. You know what I mean?
That might be, I have to say I put this part of the PowerPoint together as we were talking earlier in the meeting. And so I may not have.
That would be,
yeah,
that would be like 48% more, right? You've got, if you're trying to find 20% greater or 20% more of 48%, it would be like.
So the correct terminology here might be percentage points higher.
Well, it's just that you got to do the math right. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm not a math whiz. I can just see that because I've done some of this in the past, and I can just see that I know how that happened. And I think that, but it's important because, you know, it's a much lower percentage than 68%. 68% is a very high concentration compared to.
No, I think that you're right. And yeah, I need to double check that.
Yeah. But that's why we're talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Any other questions for Laura about this mapping, the scoring methodology? Anything else? If so, wonderful, we can keep going. If not, again, kind of looking at time, we've got about 15 minutes. One of the things I want to talk about is, obviously kind of the same question as to the last thing, what do we need to do as a subcommittee regarding this? And then how do we want to plug this into the larger commission? So any final questions or thoughts to be shared with Laura? Doesn't look like it. Laura, did you have something? No? Allison, go ahead.
Well, just I think, right, looking towards sorry, like what is on my screen? Looking towards January and kind of having a workable tool. Just would like to maybe reiterate a request to talk about who does it make sense to add, like whose weights can we add to this tool to add a little bit more body to it. I think in terms of moving forward, I think I really appreciate that perspective of, right, needing to add the priorities of those who live in affordable housing or who might access affordable housing in terms of what's the most important, and potentially see that as like a second phase, right, of like, how do we refine this tool moving forward? And then in terms of like the next month, would the housing segregation subcommittee members be willing to also provide weights, and we could schedule individual meetings with you, or do you see a different best way forward to do that?
I don't know. I wouldn't mind spending some time with you, Laura, going over this. Actually, I would appreciate it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would be happy to participate as well. But I guess I just feel like if you're just trying to get something workable that's still in draft form and there's going to be another phase, while I think it would be great for Mike or myself and Lori, whoever, to provide some input, it doesn't add a whole lot. I mean, if you're thinking about adding much more public input and doing a lot more research, it's like, yeah, let's do that before January. But also, if you didn't do it, it's still, you've got something to have a conversation about. So yes, let's do that. But like, I don't want us to be like, oh well, the three of us chimed in and now it's good to go, or like, we're getting close, we're almost there, because I don't think that's true. As smart as we are, I don't know that that's, but I'm into it to do it as well. So I don't know. What do you think, Laurie?
Yep, me too.
Cool. I mean, I guess I would suggest going off of that as well, obviously, us giving our input, but I guess I would just suggest, if staff has time, to do a little bit deeper dive into what does research show out there, research that's already been done that's looking at this. What does other research show as being important for the goals of having affordable housing in areas of opportunity? What are the things that actually help people achieve more financial, economic stability? Because I mean, that's the whole point, right? It's like affordable housing is there to help people get housing who are struggling to find housing, but to continue moving up the ladder if possible. I mean, that's the whole point of being in areas of opportunity, if that's possible for folks, that they're near jobs or they're near transit to get to the doctor, or whatever the case may be. So I would love to see some more research added to this based on what's been done already.
Thank you.
Lori? I just saw you unmute.
No, I've been unmuted.
Oh, okay, cool. So let's see, any other thoughts about that for Allison in terms of between now and January? Sounds like we're all willing to, give our input and, have charged as much as we can them to, do some research and figure out, what else might work. And I think we all agree that, Allison, I like your idea of potentially a phase 2, and, public input in something like this, I know is a really, really heavy lift, though it's really important. But so yeah, definitely a phase 2, something that, after January, I'm sure. Okay, any other requests, or do we kind of take care of that, Allison? The request, or kind of?
I couldn't unmute myself for a second. No, I think that's really helpful.
Okay.
So thank you.
Anything else, subcommittee, that we want to discuss? Anything else we need to do around this topic, or anything else that we need to do to plug into the larger commission? I mean, I guess what I'm taking away, when we give our update to the larger commission today, just that we reviewed the tool. We think it's an excellent tool, and really the place where it needs refinement are all the things that we just talked about, but that we're supportive and think it's workable for January, and that we're going to give a little bit of input and encouraging public participation and input, maybe in kind of a phase 2. Does that kind of meet the mark for our update to the larger group? Okay. With that, y'all, I think it makes sense to move on to the next agenda item, which is call to the audience. Are we ready to move on to that? Okay. Call to the audience. This is the time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. So this is the call to the audience. Is there anyone in the audience, Joe, that would like to speak at this time? Okay, I don't think there's anybody else in the audience. With that, I'll move on to agenda item number 6, next steps, items for future meetings. What do we think about items for future meetings?
Well, we're going to be coming back to income protection, right? Because of the council. That's and we'll probably have a few words about the checklist later.
Great. Anything else, Lori? Got any ideas? Yeah, I'm kind of with really keeping these same agenda items on our next agenda: the source of income protection, the checklist. It seems like, was there something else that we were talking about that we kind of wanted to keep our eye on? For those?
So, Joe, at our last meeting, and I'll have minutes for next meeting, I promise, suggested talking about exclusionary zoning as a conversation item. And, I think I'll just say, I think this group is sharing a lot of really helpful information as we kind of all navigate knowing what's going on. So potentially a discussion item on research that people have done might be a nice standing agenda item. And then I also mentioned to Jay and Lori as co-chairs that, I think we did have a conversation at the beginning, when we first started meeting, about the goals and purpose of the subcommittee. And, kind of as staff support, I was like, maybe I can draft something up and have it to review and react to for the group. And so, that would also be something that can come up either next meeting or in a future meeting, just to kind of get that squared away. It's like this group suddenly has, even if we don't know exactly what we're doing, you have a lot going on. So I appreciate your input on all of those items.
Could we put goals and purpose as the first agenda item for next time? I think that's important. And I feel like if we don't, we're kind of gonna pass by it, but I do think it's critical. We've mentioned, again, source of income protection being an agenda item, the affordable housing checklist again, and exclusionary zoning as well. So maybe we can, I don't know that it matters actually the order, but aside from having goals and purpose at the top of the list, I think. And then as far as the exclusionary zoning piece goes, will staff be able to provide some background and context to help frame our conversation? Kind of even just from, step one, what is it and why is it important and how does it fit into our affordable housing stock or lack thereof, and kind of pros and cons, and what the thinking is about it at this point?
Sure. Yeah, happy to kind of provide a background and also forward lots of the materials that Joe already has.
Great.
So appreciate that.
Any more items for our next meeting? If not, that brings us to item number 7, which is adjournment. If there are no objections, I would like to adjourn this meeting. Is everybody okay with that? I'm assuming you would all vote yes. So, all right, this meeting's adjourned.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank you.
See you later.
See you guys at 4.
Bye.